Election, it takes place over, as I said, several different stages. And so we'll talk about the different stages in our next series of lecture slides here. And so we can break this presidential election contest into five distinct stages, really only three of which the public pays any attention to. So the public begins to pay attention in stage two. That intention really increases through stage three, and then is at its highest point, stage four. And then when stage four ends, the public doesn't even know that the election continues on, unless, of course, there's a dispute or a hiccup or something unusual that happens. So I want to talk about all of these stages so that you know, going into your next presidential election cycle in 2024, when to begin paying attention to the start of that election cycle. So let's talk first with stage one, which goes by a couple of different names: the money primary, or what's most typical, the invisible primary. So the invisible primary is also referred to the pre-primary, but we'll call it the visible primary. The invisible primary is invisible in large part because the American public isn't paying any attention. This is the stage it used to be. This stage began in right as the midterm election in the previous election cycle came to an end. So if this would have been 40 years ago, it would have been the invisible primary would have begun right after the 2018 elections, leading into the 2020 election. However, because it takes so much money and time to run for the President of the United States, candidates have to begin making these decisions and getting into the race earlier and earlier. And so in this last election cycle, three individuals declared they were running for the president in 2020 and 2017, the most unusual being Donald Trump. So Donald Trump filed his campaign papers to run for the 2020 election on Inauguration Day 2017. And that is unusual. But normally it's not long after the previous presidential election ends that you begin to hear a lot of talk, particularly in the media, about the next presidential election and what candidates are going to be likely nominees and which aren't. And generally speaking, most of this is just guessing by the media to have something to talk about. So many of the candidates that they suggested would be running in 2020 never did. It was just pure speculation, including, of course, Hillary Clinton, that she would run yet again in 2020, which, of course, she didn't do. So the candidates, they used this time to raise money because after this election is ended, the two major party candidates, just Donald Trump and Joe Biden, not counting their outside spending that goes on, the two major party candidates each will spend over $1 billion and close to $2 billion. So as an individual candidate, if you want to if you want to have what it takes to make it all the way through November of the presidential election cycle, you're going to have to figure out a way to come up with around $1 billion just to make it through the nomination cycle, and then raise even more to push your way all the way through November. And this is all occurring at a time when the public isn't paying any attention. So the candidates, what they're doing right now is they're building organization. So they're trying to figure out whether they'll have any support, whether they can build a ground game in the important states that go first in the nomination cycle, and then whether or not they can get anybody to give them money. So candidates go and hold fundraisers. They show up at county fairs and state fairs. They show up at the Republican and Democratic traditional dinners that are held in honor of the party that takes place in a number of the states. Many of them, and this is a sure sign of who to look for in 2024, many of them write books or have books written for them that talks about their what they'll do to fix the problems in America. Campaign personal biographies or how to fix it kinds of books. That's a telltale sign that somebody is seriously thinking about running for the presidency. In fact, this is what Barack Obama did in 2008. And his campaign staff, they used the book tour to simulate what the nomination contest would look like, so that they could get it in Barack Obama's head that this would be a hard, long slog to make it through the nomination contest. So they wanted to make sure he was really ready to run. And Obama had said after he had left office that that simulation was great in getting him used to what it was like being on the road most of the days of the week. Candidates also began to show up in television spots. So they'll show up on the Daily Show or the Late Night Show, or they'll make the rounds on the Sunday talk shows. They might sit down for 60 Minutes. They'll appear as guests on MSNBC or Fox News, depending on which audiences that they want to reach. And that's to begin boosting their name recognition, because during this time, the media begins to start handicapping the chances of candidates to win. And what the media looks for in their handicapping, which in many cases is wrong, so they totally missed Donald Trump, of course, in 2016, as many of us did. What they look for is name recognition, which happens by way of public opinion polls. So what candidates are showing up in public opinion polls and which candidates aren't. They also look for fundraising. How much money has the candidate raised? And in particular, how much of that has been raised by people giving less than $200? Now, this is one of the things that gave Barack Obama more coverage than Hillary Clinton in 2008. Hillary Clinton raised more money at the start of the nomination fight in 2008 than Barack Obama did. However, most of Hillary Clinton's money came from from donors who maxed out the limit on how much they could give. So her donor base was very vertical and narrow. Whereas Barack Obama raised less money than Hillary Clinton, but most of his money came from people who gave $200 or less. So his was more like a triangle with a broad base of support amongst people who gave very little money at all. And the media used that to make the argument that Obama, his base of support was much broader than Hillary Clinton's, thus making him the favorite to win over her, which of course she complained about, claiming that this was an example of media bias against female candidates, of which she had a good argument both in 2008 and 2016, in which her coverage treated her sex as a handicap when compared to her male counterparts. And then the final thing the media looks for is endorsements. How many governors, sitting members of Congress, former presidents, etc., how many have endorsed the candidates? An endorsement is a sign for the media that the party is backing one or a couple of candidates. And so this gets more and more intense the closer you get to the election, and then really to try to balance out some of the differences in what candidate's getting a lot of attention and what candidate isn't. The parties then will hold a series of debates beginning a year before the election. And so usually in the summer before the primaries start, the parties will start hosting debates, and that's to gin up interest for a multiple number of candidates rather than just one or two, hoping that will keep the enthusiasm going through the nomination fight and into the general election. Now, the second stage of this, of course, is the primary stage. The primary stage takes place at the beginning of the election cycle and continues all the way through until a candidate has gotten enough delegate support to be considered the nominee. So ostensibly, it can continue all the way into the late spring, early summer of the election year. And so in our next lecture here, we're going to talk about the differences between primaries and caucuses, as well as the way in which this schedule is laid out and how that advantages some candidates and disadvantages others.